part of this afternoon was really an educative experience where representatives of the Government of India and Brussels representing the European Commission, and David is still here with us on this panel, really talked about how social media is being used by government institutions on engaging with civil society. Osama gave us a very good sense of what the reality is about India. This session is really a discussion on what we can now learn from each other, the European Union and India. What are some of the practices and the challenges and the opportunities where India and European Union can perhaps collaborate, cooperate, help each other, learn from each other. So I hope that this session will be more insightful and more practical to the extent that we share stories about what's going on. And I often describe, and I'm sure many of you do, India as a European Union itself, because we have almost 29 countries, but we just call them states. And I'm sure the challenges that we have to reach out to people in different languages, different cultures, different societies are as what I'm sure David and his team would be facing at Brussels too. Let me. I'm sure you know the panelists, but let me quickly introduce and welcome Nikhil Pahwa of Media Nama, as well as Volker Pabst of NZZ, which is a very big newspaper based out of Zurich. Chinmay Arun on my left, she's from the Center of Communication Governance, National Law University. Osama Manzar, of course, has spoken earlier. He's from the Digital Empowerment Foundation, and David Tunney, EEAS at Brussels. I would prefer to give prominence to the speakers who haven't had a chance yet. And with due respect to David and Osama, I'll begin with Volker. If you could give us some sense, Volker, on how media in Switzerland and perhaps NZZ is using digital media and digital platforms to not just disseminate but also engage with your readers.
Hello, everybody. Just two.
No, the flag went off. Thank you.
Two preliminary remarks. First, I'm unfortunately neither Swiss nor European since I'm neither Indian nor European since I'm Swiss, and you know that we are a funny country who doesn't even belong to the European Union. And the second part, I already apologize. I might have to leave a little bit early because I'm correspondent for a Swiss paper. I'm covering the whole of South Asia, and the Nepal crisis is part of my job, so I already apologize for that. I write for a paper which is 230 years old and which had for 225 years functioned as if there has been none or fairly limited technical innovation, and so it took us quite some time to actually adapt to or let's put it differently, we saw for a long time social media more as a challenge than as an opportunity, and I phrase it this way because I think that's true for most traditional media. It is an enormous opportunity to interact with your readers, to reach out to far more many people that you usually would have. But it also questions a lot of ways how you function, how you plan your day, how you work, how you create a story. We can go into details if you're interested in that later on. So that's what I think for traditional media, to which my paper definitely belongs. For a long time, social media has been seen mainly as a challenge and as a threat. And I think that's quite an interesting point to think about.
Thank you. Nikhil, your views? You're also quite a champion of the internet. And again, what's fascinating about him is that he's sort of a one-man army in many ways because he's not backed by any large, huge government, public or private foundation. It's really your own efforts and thoughts that you have, which has been leading this. So quickly, in your view, Nikhil, what do you think are the key issues? Perhaps you can use that mic. What are the key issues you think are dominating social media? Do you think that public and private institutions have really understood what social media is all about?
So I think they're trying to understand. That's one good thing about it. That's a change from a few years ago. But one of the things that's missing is the participatory nature of social media, right? And involving people in your journey. So, this is not a one-man army. It's one man and many armies in a sense, because what we've ended up doing is that we've helped educate, inform, and we've helped educate and inform people and allow them to participate in everything that we've done. And that's something which started with Medianama, which is a publication I started in 2008, where if I was going for an interview with someone, I'd ask on Twitter saying, hey, do you guys have any questions that I can answer? And when they asked questions, we gave credit and we answered those questions for them. So that participatory nature is something which we've grown up with. And, there is a tendency for both large organizations as well as governments to think that people are sheep, and I think that's being increasingly proven wrong. I'll give you a small example of something that happened towards the end of the 90s. I used to be a member, anonymously a member of a forum called freshlimesoda.com, which is now shut down. It shut down a few years in 2003. But I was 16 and I found that there were people who were discussing nuclear deterrence, 16 and 14-year-olds there who were discussing nuclear deterrence, right? So there are people who do, even, no matter how young they are, they do think about things, and they are intelligent people. It's just that no one makes an effort to reach out to them or help inform them or work with them. And I think that base is now coming online. That some of that base has now come of age, and what we've done is we've helped work with them. We've helped inform them, and there are people who had a lot of angry questions, and we've explained to them why we're doing what we're doing, why certain things matter. And one by one, person by person, we've started winning people over, and they've won more people over, and now I can just, I can see this happening where there are people who've become so passionate about the campaign that we're running that sometimes we have to rein them in and say, hey, listen, you don't need to get angry about things. We can have a rational discussion. So I'm sorry I'm going on and on.
No, but let me just come back to you on this issue of people are not sheep and people are being treated like sheep, which I think is a pretty strong thing to say. Mm-hmm. It's also because people want to be treated like sheep, because people are not actually, even people don't really understand the power of the media that they are present on.
I don't know. I don't want to be treated like sheep, and I don't know anybody who does.
No, I'm saying that, do you think there's not enough understanding of how people don't realize the way that you can get together on a certain issue and either take on the government or the private sector or anybody else? I think that collaborative effort of people to come together on social media is not developed enough because the understanding is weak.
I think the two greatest examples we have of people collaborating are Wikipedia and GitHub. And the open source and fast movement is a clear example of how people contribute without really any incentive, but apart from the fact that they want to add to something that matters. And if you can create something that matters to people, they will contribute. There's this little idea I have that I'd sort of even book the domain name for. That's the first thing I do when I get an idea. This concept called neki, there's a saying in Hindi, which basically means that do good and then forget about it, right? So can we have platforms which allow people to come together and contribute their time and effort to causes that they believe in? And so, for example, if I want to create a platform that allows companies to donate computers to schools that need them, can we build? There are people who can contribute code, time, and effort to building these sort of platforms. People will contribute. I'm contributing. Many others are contributing. 1 million people have written mails, to the TRI. They want to contribute. They are involved now.
Thank you. No, I think that's a good point, Chinmay. This is a point which I'd like to come to you also about, which is that most people who you see online are for entertainment. Some of them who want to leverage it for slightly more serious issues, contemporary issues facing our society, perhaps have to be led, right? Because they're so dispersed, they're so dissipated that it's difficult to get a lot of people together. And whenever somebody you have to reach a campaign, it's usually run by an organization and not really run by individuals. So how do you see this maturing?
So I'm going to address this from, and this is a very experiential perspective as somebody who has taught. And I find it quite strange, actually, that we behave in our classrooms as if the internet doesn't exist. And by that, I don't necessarily mean me. Luckily, my university happens to be, quite wired. We have like projectors you can get online and whatnot. But I mean, the culture of education is sort of built around this. So, for example, it's frowned on to bring laptops into classrooms. I let my students sneak them in anyway. But the idea is basically that serious work doesn't happen online, right? And I think that basically affects the way in which people use the internet, because as we all know, there are you could use it. I've had points in my life where I was completely bored, so I was reading like 6 international newspapers a day when I was basically a kid, just because I was so thrilled with the idea that I could. When I was a teenager, the fact that you could access The Guardian was amazing, because I had most of my teenagehood in which you couldn't. But it doesn't occur to you until somebody puts this idea in your head, right? And it doesn't occur to you that you just basically have this boundless sphere of information. So it's interesting that because we don't engage with our students in this way, that might possibly influence the choices that they make online. So, for example, most of my friends are, all the social media journalist types. And so we had a summer school in which I had a friend from Berlin do a Skype lecture to my students in India. And he said, hey, just tweet your questions at me. Now, the amazing part of this was we had about 22 students in the room and 3 were on Twitter. All the faculty members were on Twitter because we were all a young lot. And so it hadn't crossed their minds that there's something useful about being on Twitter. There's a certain kind of engagement that it enables, which like putting up your hand in a classroom just doesn't, right? But apart from that, we've been trying, at least through my center, to integrate our students into the space a little more, but it takes time. And it took a few years for them to sort of get used to the idea that they could go online, they could engage. We try, for example, to get them to participate more in the Internet Governance Forum, which usually will take place in some exotic place in the world. But, you can watch the whole thing. You can tweet questions. You could be, sort of part of a webcast. And these are all things that it does not occur to people to do, again, because we are not mainstreaming it in education. So that's one.
I can ask you, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Chinmay, but how can this issue be addressed? How do you tell students and other members of the society that internet and online media is more than just entertainment? And I think that's really the key issue here.
That by using it as more than entertainment. So the way in which I would do it is that if I'm assigning readings in the classroom, firstly, I don't bar laptops from my classroom because I think curiosity is a good thing. And so if you're doing a lecture in a classroom, what you want is that sometimes you say a little thing that a student doesn't understand and they quickly look it up. Because the truth is that we all live in this attention deficit universe now, right? And so the old style classroom, and again, I say this without studying structures, this is completely experiential. The old style classroom had this idea that you had to be listening to the teacher all of the time, and otherwise you're not being serious and all of that. But that's not how we read anymore. I think that all of us have this thing where we're reading a text and then it sort of sends us off into a mini rabbit hole for about 3 minutes and then we come back. And it means sometimes that that the way in which you understand material is more rich. So I don't ban laptops from my classroom. I tell people, in fact, that, okay, I'm sending you this reading. Parts of it are difficult, but there's this thing called the internet on which you could look stuff up. So please do, because you'll learn a lot more along the way while you're at it. And please also don't imagine that this one journal article is definitive. Ideally, you should be reading around it. It should raise questions that you want to look up on your own. And that hopefully, for some people, creates a practice of looking things up online. But I don't want to hog the time. Later on, I also wanted to discuss how universities should be engaging with social media. But maybe I could do that in a second.
Sure. We'll come to that. Osama, it's also, I think, important to point out the fact that not everything on the internet is true. So increasingly you have students who sort of quote everything from the internet. The internet says it, and fortunately or unfortunately, one company has decided to create internet.org, which means that becomes the internet, and we don't know what the rest of it is. But since you represent large parts of the society who don't really have access, and you're trying to bring it there to internet, can you give us some insights into what is the first stepping stone into the internet for people just entering the online space? And that could give us some solutions on how to make sure that people leverage it for the right thing.
Okay, so we all agree, I guess, is that we live in an uneven world, the disconnected people and the connected people. The connected people, of course, are the
I would argue even the connected people are disconnected between each other.
Yeah, so you're talking about soul and heart, that I agree. So first thing that, when we go to a rural India, of course, power is an issue, connectivity is an issue, road is an issue, and everything is an issue. But one thing that is not leveraged by most of the telcos and most of these people who want to connect to the people is that using the open spectrum and free spectrum. So we basically, first thing is connect. And we firmly believe, and it has been proven over and over and again in most of our location, that even if you just connect, that itself is an enabler of a huge level. You don't even have to think about content, you don't even have to think about services, nothing. Just connection itself makes many, many things, because most of the people, they know what they're looking for, or they will figure it out because there is a peer-to-peer group of learning and something. Like I said to you, as soon as we connect people, first thing they go is to watch movie on YouTube, and we, which is organized sector in rural India, we show YouTube movies on the wall as an entertainment because you don't violate any copyright. And we have broadband connection in the deepest of the Rajasthan villages and the Bihar villages, because we use, just to let all of you know, is that we use free spectrum, which is 5.8 gigahertz and 2.7 gigahertz. TV is here. He can also say that there are free spectrum available in the country, which anybody can use, and we have connected almost 200 kilometers of areas, which is not only media dark but electricity dark also. And let me also tell you that if they do not get a backhaul of internet connectivity, they talk to each other on video conferencing, and all on open source. And it has been proven, anybody want to experience, you can experience. And they have been first, not only netizens, but also not originally illiterate people per se, as a definition of literate and all that. They are all dropout or, perennially drop out or never gone to school. Dropout will be one who will be dropped out, but they never attended school.
But some of the issue here is that it seems to be that connection seems to be the end objective for most public institutions, that, just connect them. But what do they do with that connection? I mean, does your foundation, for instance, do you try to help people understand what are the various possibilities? Okay,
so that's what I said we usually believe in minimalistic. For example, I treat exactly connectivity like a highway. If I make a highway, that doesn't mean I will also make a mall. Somebody else will make a mall, and they will themselves make a shop. And you have seen it. If you go to highway, the people, you see that how shops keep coming on the highway. And that's the content and services. So similarly, as soon as you get connected, if they are asking for Facebook, the second day they start loading on the Facebook. I have examples of people living in the village selling on OLX. Their furniture, there are many things that they figured out. And it is not the old woman of the village, but the young guy. I have seen in the village, when the first time they get connected through the mobile, it is nothing that they go to except entertainment. And we always think that, okay, if you're thinking about poor people, disconnected people, first give them the entitlement, second give them the food, the third give them books. No, they want to watch movie. They want to have entertainment because that's the least available to them there. And we have in abundance all kind of entertainment. They want to watch movie. They want to listen music, and so on and so forth. And we undermine those kind of requirements, which we take it for granted, and we think that these essentials are health, education, and food. And that's the last thing they want on a connectivity, So these are some of the experience that we need to figure out.
I'll come back to this issue of how people can be using internet and how that is evolving, because nobody should really take control of that. It has to be left to the society, but I'm sure some ideas can be exchanged. David, you mentioned some interesting examples, including of Estonia, where 30% vote online, but at the same time, all of Europe is not on the same page. So, again, the question is, how are people in Europe across different countries and communities, how are they using social media? Do you see patterns there? Do you see some evolution? Is everybody, even in Europe, for example, when people get on the net, is entertainment the key thing for them, or do they look at it for other aspects as well?
Thank you. Okay, well, that's a big question. I think, of course, there's the entertainment aspect. I mean, we see that all the time in Europe, that people do value the internet and the web and social media for the entertainment value. But also, in the political sense, people are using it more and more. I mean, it seems to be that every election we have, certainly every European election we have, and even now national elections, we have a national election coming up in the UK, and we've had one in Finland. Social media is becoming more and more important for the people, but also more important for the political parties and the people who are trying to get elected. That's important. So it's growing in importance in the political sphere, absolutely. In terms of connectivity and social media users in Europe, yes, the trend is up, is completely up, and will continue to be for the foreseeable future. I mean, the issues are, broadband access, issues about privacy, data, that sort of thing, and then, of course, the emerging single digital market, which is what the European Commission is working on. So, I mean, there are a multitude of issues there.
Right. I had a question on diversity, but if you could just expand a little bit about the digital single market that you were referring to earlier. Ambassador also mentioned about it, but what would expand a little bit on that. What would digital single market mean for citizens in Europe, and perhaps for people in India who are interacting with Europe?
I think the purpose of the digital... I mean, as you know, in Europe, we have a single market of 503 million people, 28 countries. It's a single market where you can set up businesses, you can move around, free movement of labor, free movement of businesses, services, goods, intellect. So we already have that in terms of, if I want to set up a trucking company, I can go wherever I want in Europe. The idea for the digital single market is really to mirror that in the digital sense, in the sense that if I'm in, for example, Germany, I will be able to buy goods online the same way that somebody in the Czech Republic or Poland can, because now that's not the case, you see. So that's one of the aspects of the digital single market. The other aspect, of course, is copyright, because copyright is a crucial role in terms of, setting up a company, establishing it. So common rules on copyright is another important one, because that's important for the movement. Another aspect of the digital single market is accessibility, of course, a free, a much more faster broadband service, both in towns and in countries. That's a crucial part of it. So I think the European Commission are due to announce several new proposals in I think the next 2 or 3 weeks, actually. So let's see. I mean, it has huge economic opportunities. It has huge job creation opportunities as well, the possibility of a digital single market. And I think it will benefit not just Europe, but also people who buy European goods online will also probably benefit, hopefully.
So can somebody from India set up an online commerce business in Europe with the least issues?
You've put me on the spot there, but I would say probably yes.
All right. Well, as you said, it's evolving, so please do keep that in mind when you go back to Brussels. Nikhil, this issue of digital single market, what are the sort of uneven issues that you see in India? I mean, can India claim to have a digital single market?
I think the internet is a digital single market, frankly. It's just a direction that's been given to the rest of the world that's divided between various countries and geographical areas, that this is a market that wants to work together as a united market in a sense, and we want to bring more and more people on board. These divisions are largely because of taxation reasons, because of regulation considerations, and the challenges that each separate country faces separately. In India, for example, we've had PayPal, which is blocked for a while, and Indian merchants who were using PayPal weren't able to use it globally. Copyright issues, again, are the clear indication of the fact that there's so much of piracy online is because, it started because businesses were unwilling to put content up. The internet wants these boundaries to essentially dissipate, and we're faced with a situation where countries are trying to protect their own revenues like a company tries to protect its own revenues in a sense. So in India, if you think about it, is there a challenge here? I think there are state-wise challenges in India. For example, there are taxation issues because goods being shipped from one state to another, different taxes apply. In Maharashtra, you've got octroi, whereas other states you don't. And in e-commerce companies in particular have faced tax rates in different states. So Karnataka, I think Amazon and Flipkart both have faced issues. So I guess as countries, we have to evolve to a situation where we have internally first unified markets, and then move to the situation which consumers like me have always wanted, which is a global unified market. I don't think that that's kind of utopian. It's not going to happen, but that's the direction in which people are pushing the governments that rule us, in a sense.
Chinmay, you want to come in on this because we are looking at, clearly one of the thoughts which emerges is that India has much to learn, at least in terms of creating a common digital market from what Europe is doing by reducing the disparity and the tax structures that we have. But you wanted to talk about education and the use of social media and internet for education. Do you see what are the kind of differences do you see in approach of using internet for education across the country in India?
So, with your permission, I want to say something slightly different instead, because if I don't want to discuss digital media and education because I haven't been studying education policy. It was a good thing to flag, just because I feel like anyone that is into junk food for the mind offline is usually into it online as well, and the purpose of general education is to sort of curate that a little bit. What I wanted to discuss is the implications of the lack of research in this space for the policy that emerges not only in the market context but also in the context of all forms of regulation. So what I was struck by, I did my master's degree in the UK, and I did it at a faculty. The London School of Economics engages quite a lot with government policy and was subsequently involved with a study of the London riots along with Guardian. And I was really struck with how academic institutions in this country are doing relevant research, are partnering with all the right organizations, and are generating data for intelligent policy making. We have a serious problem with that in India. I mean, if you look through the newspapers in the last couple of years, you'll find that there are so many people who are able to give you the percentage of abuse of Section 66A. Oh, it's only in 2% cases that there is misuse, and the rest of the time it's fine, right? This is based on basically no data because nobody's doing research on it. And it's critical if you want to decide whether a law is being misused or not, that you actually study it. And this is a serious issue with academia as a whole. So London...
Just one point, who should be doing this research, in your view?
Universities, ideally, but the incentive structure is such that governments need to recognize the need for this before universities do this.
Yeah, please go ahead.
So one of the things that we did, that I've been doing, like I knew the net neutrality issue was going to crop up because I'd been seeing the statements that were being made. So about 2 years ago, we started documenting every little bit that we came across. And today, when there were people who were asking questions and there were people who were looking for proof, we had everything documented. So I don't think research is the mandate of just researchers in a sense, but just collecting information, compiling. I think media organizations need to connect the data or the stories that they're doing so often, and I can see this as a journalist, that when people do a story today, they seem to have forgotten the story that someone else in their publication did last year.
And that's willingly, they don't want... everybody wants to claim to have an exclusive story, that's why.
No, but even within your own organization, they don't look back and give today's news in the context of yesterday's news. And I'm not putting down researchers, Chinmay, but I'm just saying that collecting and compiling information is a continuous process. It's a body of work, is the way I see it. And that's where media needs to come in as well.
No, I don't take that as putting down researchers at all. I guess that research is a very broad category. Data gathering has its very definite virtues. What I'm saying is something slightly different, which is that academia needs to engage with cutting-edge issues and needs to stop sitting in its little bubble. I'm so sorry I can't think of EU examples immediately, but for example, Dana Boyd's work on the way in which young people use the social media has been so valuable in breaking down a lot of assumptions about young people online, right? The ways in which you can protect their privacy. And in India, I feel like these assumptions skew choice a lot, and breaking these assumptions is a combination of data which is very valuable, and an understanding within various fields. So, for example, if it were my field, then I can talk to you about constitutional rights, because that's something that we are able to look up properly, that we're able to articulate fully. We have access to all the material, we have the skill set, we've been studying this for a while, we're able to do this. But there are other questions like, traffic management that we don't know anything about, and for that you'd have to go to a different kind of academic institution. But I really feel like all of them need to get their acts together. Funding needs to be directed towards them, which is something we could really learn from the EU. I find that there are several European universities that do make this priority. And
so that's a good point. I think fundamentally the point you made, and which seems to be endorsed by Nikhil as well, is that researchers, the academia, the media, any publicly funded institution, privately funded institution can do it. But Osama, what's your view on this? I mean, why is there a lack of research on this on social media?
Primary data is not easy. Primary data is not easy. I mean, a couple of things that I would share. Everybody has been talking about NOFIN, National Optic Fiber Network, and that government is lagging behind. It's not going forward and all. But nobody has anything to say. So we went on the ground to all the 59 locations, took the photograph on the tablet and locations and everything. Turned out that 70% of even the pilot is not working. Forget about the whole country, 250,000 of panchayat, only 59 locations are not working. So I am saying sourcing primary data is not easy. And I don't think, maybe on the other hand, it's an opportunity that the crowd is online, source the data from the crowd and then do the analytics. And there are things happening, analytics are happening by sourcing the data. But I think unless you have the primary data, there is, and it's costly. It is certainly costly. You need to spend it, and that thought has to come from the government itself.
Because that's, again, you get into a question of who should be funding research, because we all have a fundamental distrust of anybody funding research. And if it's the government funding research, you think it's skewed towards the government. If it's private sector, then it's agenda driven.
No, but you can mix the government and the academics. All the academia, which is part of the government institution, in any case, government should spend more and more money on research. I mean, there is no dispute on this. And therefore, when the private organizations start doing it, we start asking that is it a business interest or not. And therefore, it is important that the more government kind of institution, which is educational institution, academic institution, does it, it's better.
David, what's your thought on this? How does it work in the European Union?
Well, I think most of the research, as far as I'm aware, in the European Union tends to come from either public organizations, universities, academics, students. We receive a lot. I mean, I and our organization, the European External Action Service, receive a lot of studies. People tweet us or send us studies that they've done on social media or digital diplomacy or that sort of thing. So it seems to come mainly from the academic world, I would say, in Europe. But of course, many private companies do research on social media. Of course they do, because it's in their interest to find out, to crunch the numbers to see which platforms work best for them. And then you have journalists, of course. Journalists in Europe do a lot of research, but their research tends to be based on what role did social media play in certain international crisis, like, for example, what's going on in Ukraine now. So they tend to look at the role of social media either in elections or international crisis or revolutions or so on and so forth.
Fokker, would you like to come in on this? Nikhil mentioned media, but does NCC, for example, do a lot of research on this? Do you have examples of other media in Europe stepping into research on this side?
I think as most traditional media companies, we are developing this sector, but it doesn't play the role that it probably should play. That's what I wanted to say at the beginning with my statement. It's still, of course, these examples, Ukraine, Arab Spring is another big one. On the meta level, you can see what is the importance of social media. But social media is, I think, for journalists, mainly a tool to research, and this is, I would say, still not fully employed by most of my colleagues, and including me in many cases, I must say.
Yeah, I'll just come to you, Nikhil. But one question, Fokker, I have for you, and I know you'll have to leave early, so I want to sort of make sure you have your say. There was a question in the last session which actually I asked, is that do you find that social media in Europe is being used to block out traditional media and from traditional media to ask questions of public figures? Because, if you're on Twitter, then nobody can get to ask you questions. If you don't answer, nobody really can force you to. But unlike a mic put under your nose where you have to say something, how are public figures in Europe and in Switzerland using social media? Are they becoming more accountable or less? And I put this to you as a senior journalist from Europe.
I would find hard to give a trend. It is. I think many institutions in many countries, they're just about to develop a strategy, so you don't really have a common policy on that, and it really depends on the individual. We do have a few people in Switzerland, which probably doesn't make much sense when I name them now, who are extremely proactive and accountable, but since it's not all of them, they also generate more attention, and this makes it more likely that they also try to manipulate. So I wouldn't really say there's a general tendency towards more or less accountancy, because I would, at least as for Switzerland, we're not at this level yet. It really is on a very individual level extremely different from person to person how it's used.
Thank you. Nikhil, you were saying something.
So just on the point about media organizations and research, I've been helping researchers with research for the last 3 or 4 years. And the unfortunate part of it is that none of that research, even once it's done, is really accessible to people. So, I mean, I see this as a change in role for media organizations, and we've seen a business called O'Reilly in the US do it about 7 or 8 years ago. And we're trying to do the same. We've just set up a business unit for research about 2 months ago, but something that simplifies and makes research more accessible and tries to make it cater to the specific needs of, for example, both businesses as well as regular people. So some of that research we're using in our own work. And I know that media organizations have their own research unit. It's just that they don't communicate what they already have to everybody outside. Right? I think most business channels, for example, in India have it. Economic Times also has its own research unit. But they just keep it for their own users for some reason.
But I can tell you, because I used to run Bloomberg TV earlier, that most of the research is for stock market analysis. It's not meant for anything except telling people to buy, sell or hold. So, it has a very, very, very narrow perspective on that front.
I know, but you see, we're living in a world where there's so much of information out there that you need someone to make sense of it. And I don't think, I think media organizations are better equipped to communicate that research to people rather than research organizations themselves. And I'm just saying this without being disparaging towards academics, because I've helped with so much of this and I've seen none of it really being accessible to people.
Foka, would you like to add? I'll just come to Chinmay. Would you like to add to this?
I think it goes a little bit into the general question of how complex an issue, how abstract a question can be transported to the audience, and does it have to be always in the traditional scientific way of doing it, how we're used to it? In my paper, for example, I think it was back in the 50s where we still discussed if adding a picture to an article makes it less serious. So and I guess as journalists we do have more we are better trained, or at least more used to try to present complex issues in a way that are more acceptable to the broader audience. But I guess one of the big benefits of social media or digitalization in general is that this opportunity is open to anybody. And here we come to a question, I'm not sure if we have time to go in that, but I think with means of transport information or transfer information which are available to everybody with social media, how important is the job of a information manager, which is my job, which I'm paid for. I'm not developing information, creating information as a researcher, but I'm just transmitting it. Is this something that's dying out or not? And that's why what I was saying is many traditional media houses see it as a challenge, because they think, what is actually left of the business that we used to do? And so I think that's my thought on it.
Sure. Chinmay, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I feel like it's actually, an indictment of how bad academia has been at consolidating its place in research, that we don't understand the difference between academia and journalism in the context of research. Academic research is not just about data gathering, it's about the building of a discipline. And that's something that India lacks profoundly, and the fact that you're not seeing major reports coming out, which is a very legitimate criticism, is because we have not been building a discipline around these issues, right? So to give you an example, if you were looking at criminalization of speech, 66A is what I talked to you about earlier. You could do the statistics, yes, and most people can do the statistics if they have the time and the patience to go and dig out the numbers. But there's more to it than that, right? So if you were an academic that studied the law, then you would say, okay, this is an instance of criminalization of speech. Then you would look at the history of criminalization of speech, which context it's justified in. You'd use a framework that is pretty old, that comes from many years of study. And ideally, you would be presenting that framework in front of other academics on a regular basis. So my colleagues that are criminal law specialists would tell me, yeah, I'm sorry, you've got so-and-so thing wrong. And then you go back and read again. And it's actually something that takes a lot more time. It is very valuable in its own way. And I agree that there is a point at which it needs to be communicated to the public. That's an interface that we're working on ourselves. But the value of doing that research in its sort of its silo and doing it over years, focusing on a narrow area over years, cannot be underestimated. And I feel like that's something that Europe has understood properly and India hasn't, because we've just been operating at such a shallow level. So I think that, Volker, the distinction that you make about transmission of basically analysis and performing a deep enough analysis is a really valuable one in this context.
Thank you. One last issue I want to raise at the panel, and then I'd like to bring in all of you in, is that we talked earlier about how, the walls are coming down and all the internet makes it everybody can be on it and say whatever they feel like and share their views, they can connect, they can talk to public figures. But David, doesn't this also provide a serious challenge, because it also removes all filters of sanity, if I may. You can just say about anything, and we've seen, at least in Delhi, I don't know, but it's a combination of social media and mobile messaging services, that it creates a lot of fear-mongering. It can create rumors which can seriously affect communities and their safety and their well-being. How do you tackle this challenge at EU?
Well, I think you're right. Social media is just a tool, and depending on who uses it, and some people do use it for negative or nefarious ways, don't they? Either individually or collectively, or they're organised by a certain organisation. Some have used social media to spread fear and hatred and violence. That's the dark side of it, isn't it? I think in terms of our platforms at External Action Service, how do we deal with negative comments or things that are extremely violent or racist or whatever? Generally speaking, we believe that we're the European Union, so we believe in freedom of speech. So we're relatively laissez-faire about negative comments and things like that. There are certain rules, certain limits, certain comments that we would block or delete, but we do it very rarely, actually. So our policy is to be relatively laissez-faire with comments and stuff, because we also realize that, the social media world, the communities, is somewhat self-correcting, because if somebody posts an idiotic or vulgar comment on our page or tweets or something, generally we think that the people in our community will respond to them and say, hey, that's a really stupid idea, or that's a really stupid comment. So the community, can take on a life of its own. So I think an important thing for public institutions is that when you're criticized on Facebook or Twitter or whatever, often you have to remember that the criticism is not necessarily directed at you. It is a criticism that is for a wider audience. You see, that's important. But nevertheless, it's many dark groups, for example, ISIS, have woken up to the power of social media, haven't they? So it's something that will increase, I think, in the future.
Osama?
I don't know. I would say that everybody should come online to equate it. There are more good people in the world than the bad people. So if you think we are in danger of having online taken over, and the people want to pose a lot of problems.
Okay. I'm not talking about just rants. Let's say what should be the institutional mechanisms to counter misleading information, which can often take a critical mass, which makes the rest of the world believe that something untrue is happening.
Yeah, so in my earlier talk, I posed a serious issue of governance. A serious issue of governance, need to understand the need of the infrastructure, need of the technology, need of the experts, and all that. And incidentally, it's the challenging part is not to be ready for them, because there is a geometric progression of people coming online than the preparedness that you need to have
Absolutely.
for them. That's a bigger problem. So that's the reason I also said that we have to think digital rather than
that's why I want this panel to suggest some solutions also, and drawing from all your vast experiences, collective experiences, and also the institutional experience of David.
So one liner is that government need to have a proper digital department or whatever in each and every ministry, which is not there. It cannot only depend on the Ministry of IT as a one ministry to thing. It is a backbone of everything. It is a backbone of all and every information. So therefore, only MIB cannot have a social media thing. Only Ministry of IT cannot have just for thinking of websites and IT and services and all that. It is a part and parcel of each and every day life. So therefore, each and every ministry, therefore each and every department, and therefore
you're absolutely right, because in a previous life I had to work with the public service organization, and I was overwhelmed to see that some of the social media activity was actually handed out to the IT guys.
Yeah.
And just because it involved clicking and a mouse and some broadband connection, so the IT guys were doing the social media work, and clearly they were clueless. And somebody told me that we don't have the broadband connectivity, that's why we can't have YouTube, because for YouTube I need to put a 16 MB line or some stupid thing like that. But anyway, that's another story.
I wanted to address
but I'm coming to both of you. Yeah.
So there are two things to consider here. One is hate speech, and the other is misleading information. When it comes to laws that look at hate speech online, I think the Supreme Court judgment on 66A addressed it quite well, where they said that you have three types of speech essentially. Discussion, advocacy, and incitement. When there is incitement is when restrictions on free speech come in, and I think Chinmay can speak more about this one, but I thought that's a great way of looking at it. And if there are laws that have to look at speech, they have to be about incitement and not discussion and the advocacy part. On misleading information, I think it's pretty simple, because one, governments have to be always vigilant, and so do organizations. Everybody has to always be tracking about what's going on and be on the ball with it, that you don't have an option anymore. If there are people who are going to be, if hundreds and thousands of people are going to be up through the night in a position to create misleading information, you have to be there tracking it and responding to it. The other thing that I think a great change that's happened over the last few years is the creation of verified accounts, which means that whoever uses that is providing authentic information. So you have to counter misinformation with authentic information, because misinformation spreads more quickly than you can address it. And you can always direct people to basically authenticated information.
But who will do that direction?
That has the entities that have to be vigilant, governments, organizations, people. Once you put authenticated information out there, you'll see the other side of social media where people will use that to counter any misinformation out there. And they are in the sense, counter hundreds and thousands of people spreading misinformation with hundreds and thousands of people who spread authentic information. And that's one of the things that when we saw a couple of years ago, when there was misleading information about people from the northeastern India that came out, the government started blocking SMS and blocking access. The problem is the information still persists once it's blocked. You had to counter that with authenticated information. The government should have sent SMSs telling people, don't worry, things are being taken care of. Whatever's being spread is lies, right? It has to come from authentic sources. Someone's got to take that leadership. And I think the organizations that are in charge have to take the leadership role of countering misinformation with more information.
Foucault?
Yeah, I think the same is true for a media company. We do also have our own policy, which is probably pretty similar to what in the EU, how it is handled in the EU, because we also believe in, of course, in free speech, and we wouldn't really censor somebody, but the moment it becomes abusive or insulting, then we would step in. But still, perhaps it's because we are a small country and there are not so many people in it. But just one example. I was covering Russia and Ukraine issues when I was back in Switzerland. This was one of the foreign policy issues that created a lot of debate in Switzerland and I think in most of Europe. And we got very, very strong replies on our message, on our articles, on our op-ed papers. I was several times personally
Targeted.
But yeah, I'm still on some Russian websites. I appear or pictures of me appear in very unfavorable settings, and so what can you do against it? Exactly, you have the only way you can do in an open society and in an open space like the internet is to counter with authentic information and especially with try to have the better arguments. But I think there's no other way to do it.
Thank you. Chinmay?
Yeah, again, one of those areas that needs detailed study, but I can tell you a little bit from the networks that I've been a part of, that there's provocative speech, which could be speech that offends people, but it has to be said. So this is speech that might counter a social norm, and therefore people find it offensive. You know they're going to find it offensive, but you should be allowed to say it anyway. Then there's speech that incites and is sometimes hateful, which is disseminated with intention. And within that, there's a subcategory which the scholar called Susan Benesch has created, which I love. It's called dangerous speech, right? So at what point do you say that speech is likely to incite violence? And if you can sort of isolate that category of speech online, that would be the most useful. So just very quickly, she says that the criteria are that if you can look at things like the influence that a speaker wields, the context in which the speech is made, the target of the speech. So for example, if I say kill all people with red hats, nobody cares what I say anyway. If I say kill all men, it doesn't matter because apart from nobody cares what I say anyway, this is a very powerful group. Nobody's going to listen to what I say, right? So the fact of whether your target is marginalized or not, the question of whether they are already under threat or not, all of this is really important when you're thinking about what kind of speech to isolate and ban. And this is actually a great example of something that I know academics around the world are working on, so that bans can be very, very targeted and can only protect people from harm, nothing else.
Thank you. I think we have about 10 minutes, Puram.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Yeah, all right. Just shoot us if we go over that. Let me collect questions, and if you could keep it brief, then I can collect more questions, and more people can have a say. Sir, please. And do introduce yourself so that we know who you are.
I'm Rajiv Kumar. I was chief producer of News and Current Affairs of Doorshan, national network. Just talking about misleading information. Yesterday, this is regarding the earthquake in Nepal. A message was circulating on WhatsApp, which said that the earthquake is again coming at 7 p.m. That was last night. And it said that the government of India is asking people not to remain in their houses.
Yeah, I know, that's what I referred to, but what's your question?
The question is, this was misleading. This was misleading, and people really believed. I mean, I was somewhere in the area of a tall building, and people really came out. Now, if this was not true, and somewhere when you're talking about violence and something which is really true, then there'll be an attitude of misbelief. That's number one. Number two, the gentleman in front of me raised a very pertinent question that why should I give access, if I want to be on Facebook, why should I have to give access to all my information on my mobile? I just want to read what's on Facebook. If I read something on Times of India, I don't have to be a member of that group. I just buy a paper, discard that paper tomorrow and say, I don't need to read that Times of India. I may change my paper. Why should I have to be on Twitter and Facebook with all my data from my mobile phone?
Right.
This is something the government has to really think about.
Thank you.
I transferred my question to...
You could introduce yourself to everybody, it'll help.
I'm Darpan Majumdar. I am from i9 Media. So my question is to David, which I wanted to ask you before that. the last session as well. David, what is your perspective, and especially considering a lot of debate on the idea of net neutrality in India? So how does EU respond to the concept of net neutrality, and especially it will be relevant to have some learnings from your side in the context of how can it work in India?
Okay, we'll come back to that question. Any other question? Anybody else? Sure.
Can any of the panelists speak on how social media gives us a space to for the subconscious of the society to come out? I mean,
What do you
I
mean
heard
by that?
yeah, someone spoke about how social media lets the insanity point. On social media, insanity also comes out. Now, a human being has a sane part, has an insane part. Like that, society also has an insanity, and it has space. Like
what is your question, sir?
I'm asking, can any on the panel, anyone, speak about the subconscious of the society coming out on social media?
Okay, so perhaps about yoga on social media, but we'll come to that question. Right, thank you. Any other question before I turn to the panel, sir?
This is Inder Sani, Gujarat Samachar Bureau Chief. Your today's event, happily, is taking place when both the social and digital media are in sharp focus. Because of this Nepal earthquake, the social media has played a key role, and hundreds of people have reached Sushma Swaraj, Foreign Minister, and she has responded.
So what's your question?
Incidentally,
yeah,
I'm coming to the question. Incidentally, Intel started its innovation of digital media campaign only 2 days ago, and they have taken the help of 2 government agencies and IIM Ahmedabad. The campaign, which will continue till January 2016, will cost about 3 crores. How do you visualize this innovation campaign of Intel, whether it will really serve the desired purpose, or how do you feel about it?
Okay, sir. I don't visualize because it's up to Intel to realize, but the lady here, did you have a question? I thought you raised your hand. No? Is that all? Can I turn to the panel? Right. So let me come to David first. David, if you could address the question on net neutrality, on what's the EU's position. But we're not having a debate on that because that requires another 3 weeks of discussion.
Yeah, thank you for your question. I'm not an expert on net neutrality. That's more for my colleagues in the European Commission. I do have 2 or 3 things I can read out for you, if you don't mind. As you know, the Connected Continent regulation is currently being considered by the European Parliament and the European Council, the 2 legislative bodies of the European Union. So the outcome is still uncertain. It apparently will be decided in either March or April this year. But the proposal set out in the Commission in 2013 foresees net neutrality to, I'm reading if you don't mind, end discriminatory blocking and throttling, set out clear rules for traffic management. Companies would, however, be allowed to differentiate their internet access service offers and to meet end users' demands for better service quality. Now, as I said, this regulation is still under consideration by the Parliament and the Council, i.e. the Member States, so I can't really speculate on the outcome. So I'm sorry, that was a very formalistic answer, but I hope it went some way. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Parliament is supreme everywhere, so it's okay. Osama? Your thoughts about the issue of, the privacy issues, that if you have to access some of these platforms, you have to give up your own data. I mean, is that the way ahead, or can a new framework be created?
I have a very mundane way of saying this. I live in an apartment. I go out and come in. I have a car. What time I go in, go out. Hundreds of people can see and record, and I don't know. Online, at least I know who is taking. If I put my data, who is taking from me. I can bar it, I can do not bar it, I can share it, do not share it. The person who is taking, the organization who is taking.
I'm not sure you can bar it. Sometimes you don't know what's being taken.
Yeah, exactly. You. But there are many times it's a lack of knowledge also. How do you share or do not share? So what I'm saying, in a public life, in a real life that we live, there are many things just I do not know. I have no idea who is really noting down my movements. But in online, my movements are, I can really track.
So you don't really get to bother about it.
I don't bother about privacy.
Chinmay, on the thoughts of privacy?
Yes, I do bother about privacy. So, sir, actually, I think the short answer is that that's how you pay for your Facebook, with your data. And I think that the bigger question to ask is what happens when you've already been on Facebook and then Facebook changes its terms and conditions and starts harvesting even more data from you, and now you can't leave because all your friends are on it. So it's very hard to extract them all and take them to a different social network. And that's where it gets unreasonable.
I have a fake name, fake profile, fake picture. They'll never know who you are. So I guess I know a lot of people who do that actually.
And fake friends.
Well, isn't that even that on offline social networks also? But Nikhil, last point before I close the session is perhaps you could address the issue of insanity as well as the issue of privacy.
So in terms of privacy, I think it's our choice, and we choose to be on these platforms. As long as it's not like spectrum that are being used to harvest your information, I think I don't have an issue. Because there are friends of mine who are not on Facebook, who opted out, Twitter's got it. We're giving our information, it's our choice. We can choose to even set up our own networks. I don't think we've reached a stage where we have significant dependency, and I think when it comes to governments disseminating information and organizations disseminating information, they have no choice but to be where the audience is, and they have to be on all platforms, including SMS, from that perspective. Now, on the question of insanity, I think it's true that the worst side of people sometimes surfaces on the internet. I don't know what we can do about it except personally blocking them or ignoring them, and can't help it, right? I mean, I don't see a solution there. Maybe Chinmay can.
Interestingly, that's also behind some kind of veil of anonymity, because they again have fake. Some of them use fake IDs.
Now, anonymity is a completely different thing, because there are marginalized parts of society that get empowered through anonymity in terms of voicing their own concerns, seeking help, and it takes a while for them to identify themselves at times. So anonymity is basically, it's a double-edged sword. There are great sides to anonymity. There are also problems, but we have to learn how to deal with it, and that's, I think, one of the biggest challenges that we have today. So I didn't quite get your question on the misleading information. I'm sorry, that I believe was directed to me.
What I meant was that information just trickles down to you and unconsciously, you just forward it.
I know.
And it's a misleading information, and how do you stop that?
And Nikhil, if I could add, sir, I think a very simple thing, again, a simple rule is, if you don't know, that's a media rule that we've always had, and I think it applies to all individuals. If you don't know what the source of information is, don't pass it on. Simple as that.
I do get your point.
But service providers themselves pass out certain SMSs just to multiply the business.
But the thing is that these are not service providers transferring these messages. The people, it's going from person to person to person, right? And the only way to address it is to counter it with legitimate information, because I'm telling you, the way people are built, if there is incorrect information being shared and there's an official counter to it, people will share that too.
Listen, I'm sure 99% of the people don't read the terms of privacy. You just press the button, I accept. I'm sure people would not.
Yeah, so that's a separate. So, I'll have to halt you here because I want to take two quick questions and then close the panel, and Chinmay wants to also. So, everybody is a late riser. I see now hands coming up. When I was asking, nobody was raising their hands. But quickly, from Pranesh, you and the gentleman there. Quickly, just 30 seconds, please. Go ahead. Just speak. You have a strong voice.
Very short comment about this discussion, which is also relates to what Chinmay said and what you asked, Pranjal. That is, one of the most important things we need to teach kids and actually even adults these days is the question of what information should you trust. Okay, and in research, in the world of research, okay, in higher academia, we normally had guidance on this. You had trustworthy sources that were in libraries which you would cite. But now everything is on the internet, and one of the first things that I had to learn as a teenager when I got on the internet was what site is reliable and what not for things like medical advice. Okay, and these kinds of very basic life skills now are in a gap area where the previous generation never had to learn it. This generation has to learn it, but we don't have the necessary curriculum to teach it.
Yeah.
And so
Right.
that goes to address this point as well. When you're forwarding stuff, whose forward should you believe? I receive 1,000 forwards a day, and I'm not kidding. And so many of them are just junk. If only people took the time to read Snopes.com, they realize that all of them are false.
Correct.
Okay?
Yeah, thank you. That's a very solid point. Quickly, could you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, I'm Neha Jalali, and I'm from the Indian Information Service, Ministry of Information and Broadcasting. I have two quick questions, actually. The first is to Mr. David. Mr. David said that social media is self-correcting. This was a welcome acknowledgement from me in the first thought. And the second thought, there was also an apprehension because we're talking of hate speeches. So my question is, how do you explain your statement looking into the mass behavior that people have? For example, there's one negative comment and then there is a series of negative comments in the same thing because negative comments multiply. How do you explain your statement?
So what is the question?
The question is that Mr. David said that social media is self-correcting because the community takes care of the negative
But you
criticism.
see that it's actually escalating and not correcting.
Yeah, the first thought was a welcome. The second thought is I'm a little apprehensive about this.
I'll
So
come
how
to
do you-
David in a second. One last question at the back, sir.
I have one question.
You have one more. Just a minute, please.
Yes.
Please go ahead. No, she has one more
Second question is actually in capacity as an Indian Information Service officer. Mr. Manzar said that connectivity is one thing and how do we use the connectivity is another thing. So in my capacity as official in this social media cell of the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, what suggestions do you have for me from your vast experience? How do I go ahead with this thing to use the connectivity? Because we have connectivity in certain quarters, but still we see that, say for example, Twitter usage is quite less than compared to the Facebook usage. So how do I improve the way people are using the internet or the connectivity, the social media per se? How do I improve this thing as a government official?
Okay, I'll ask Osama to give you a 30-second answer. The rest of it should be offline because he has, I'm sure, 5 books to offer to you. But one, and Nikhil will also give you a 30-second.
Yes. This is not a question, but a suggestion that there should be a statutory warning on the Facebook and other social media outlets that spending too much of time is injurious to your eyes and can corrupt your culture also. We see the younger generation these days saying good morning on the WhatsApp, no paripona, namaste, everything is losing, you know.
Thank you so much. Let me again begin with David and, talk about the self-correcting mechanism.
Yes, thank you. I would agree with the gentleman, the last gentleman. Sometimes it can be a bit strange. Everybody's standing there looking at their iPhones. It's a bit kind of antisocial sometimes. I think what I meant in the self-correcting sense, perhaps I didn't explain myself correctly, is of course you have negative elements who reinforce each other's message, they find each other somehow on Facebook or Twitter or social media. But when I meant self-correcting, I meant that generally, I think is what Osama was talking about, is the positives outweigh the negatives. If you have, for example, we have a lot of comments against the European Union, for example, on our page, but we tend to have more positive and more neutral comments, actually. And when we have individuals or organizations or groups who adopt extreme positions, often that extreme position, will attract a certain amount of attention, but that viewpoint will be outweighed and countered by a more rational and more impartial. So that's what I meant. That's in our experience, Of course, it depends which field you go into. The more controversial and hostile territory you go into, you might have more polar extremes. But I think if we look at our comments and the comments that we deal with, generally they are quite balanced. I would say the balanced outweigh the insane, shall we say. Okay.
Right. Osama, Chinmay, and then...
So my 30-second answer to you is that next time when I come to MIB, which I go quite often, I can sit with you and give you a...
MIB is not Men in Black, it's Ministry of Information Broadcasting.
So and that's the best way, because you looks like that you need a whole list of things that how to do this.
So that's a special session to be set up at MIB. Right. Chinmay.
I just wanted to comment that to say that all the negative comments are our subconscious mind, I think is a little pessimistic. because it suggests that this is what people really think, and it's not necessarily so. But I think that what it does seem to be some kind of outlet for all this repressed rage. And so I guess that especially if we're dealing with contexts in which a lot of people are attacking certain groups or certain people, I think it's symptomatic of there is this rage in the community, and it will need to be addressed at the community level. I don't know of anyone that does it in India. Please tell me if you do. But I know that Harvard's running this project called, I think, A Braver, Kinder World, that deals with what motivates people to bully, because that's what's happening online, really. It's a translation. These are people, right? And they're lashing out. The second thing is that I absolutely agree with the very valuable point that Pranesh made, that in the context of things like privacy, we have to understand that this is a new technology and people take a little time to learn how to use it properly. ATM pins being classic, right? It took people some years to understand that don't tell people your ATM pin. And so the internet's a little more complicated. I'm sure that the rules will evolve with time, but we'll get there. And I don't think that it's necessary to wait for governments to make sure that we get there. There's nothing stopping people from organizing and sort of accelerating the learning on our own.
Thank you. Nikhil?
So just to address your point, I think entertainment is a great gateway drug to the internet, in a sense. That's one. The other thing is that one of the things you need to realize about why the internet took off in India initially was because of Naukri.com. People could get jobs. But there's a significant tendency for us to only look at the internet from a pure utility perspective, access to government services, access to jobs and things like that. There has to be an aspect that allows people to explore and roam and find out what works for them. And I think that's where, I guess, social networks come in, because they allow them to discover a lot more. And what you can do is you can help them discover more things, discover more tools, discover great new apps. And there might be some criticism of people who are saying, why are you selecting this one and not that one? But that's how Yahoo started. It started as a directory service of sorts that allowed people to discover more things. Wikipedia is a great entry point again. It's more about allowing people to understand that they can find anything on the internet. And that's my limited suggestion for how to approach this. To the gentleman's point about the cultural thing, and I wanted to address that because it's something we hear quite often, that people don't behave the same way on the internet, to say that it's a mindset that I see quite.
That's a great summary, Nikhil, because also, just to add to this, the fact that it's still evolving and people are still learning is that TRAI has released everybody's emails online for those who sent in their suggestions. So I think that's a great example of how we are still learning and evolving. And I think to that extent, India and Europe are on common ground. Well, please join me in thanking the panel for this session. And may I invite Ms. Anne Marshall of European Union's delegation to give her vote of thanks.
Good evening, and don't worry, I won't be long because I know there is tea waiting for you all. I would like to thank all the participants for this afternoon discussion, DigiLog 2015. We have had the chance to have two points of view, the one from Europe, thanks to the presentation of our colleague from Brussels, Mr. Tony, as well as the presentation from the Joint Secretary, Mrs. Jaya, from the Information and Broadcasting, putting in front of us the view of India, as well as the voice from civil society represented by Osama, as well as all the members of this panel know. I would like to say that we certainly have to think of a DigiLog 2016, because all what we learn is that, after all, the situation of internet being a huge equalizer, it could be very useful for human rights, for democracy, for exchange of ideas, including for commerce, as has been explained for both the situation in Europe and in India. But at the end, there is still a lot of issues to be discussed, equally from a legal point of view and a social access point of view. I think that as the months will go by the time we have this second DigiLog, we would maybe know more about the issue of net neutrality, as well as maybe legal tools to deal with the problems you always know. I would like to take this opportunity to signal that this is a very interesting, I would say, multi-stakeholder discussion we had today, because we had government representatives, we had people from the EU institutions, we have also people from the Indian civil society, people from the media world, from Europe and from India. But I want to say that we also have a government-to-government, if I can say so, because the EU is not a government, but we have an official dialogue on issues of information and communication technologies, as well as a dialogue on cybersecurity. And I think some of the comments that were discussed here will find their place in the forthcoming dialogue on cybersecurity consultations. So with all this, I would like to thank, in particular, our colleague from the Press and Information, our partner DAI, for having put this panel together. I want to give a big hand and my warm thanks for all the members of the two sessions, the two panels. A special thank to my colleague David Turney, who made the trip to India, and I think we'll come back with lots of ideas on social media and how we can draw lessons from this vibrant but paradoxical context of social media in India, as well as all of you for having taken the trouble to come and join us today. Thank you so much, and tea is served.